When you hear the name Tolstoy, what do you think of? Probably the great novelist, right? The guy who wrote masterpieces like War and Peace. But the Russian government back in his day, they were way more worried about a different Tolstoy, the radical thinker. In fact, his ideas were considered so dangerous, they were just straight up banned. So today, we're going to crack open the door on those forbidden thoughts and really get to know the man behind the novel. So you've got this split, right? On one side, you have the literary giant celebrated all over the world. But on the other, you have this philosopher whose ideas about Christianity and the state were seen as so explosive that they had to be silenced. And this really gets to the heart of it. What if the Tolstoy we all know and celebrate is just one part of the man, and his most powerful message has been hiding in plain sight this whole time? We're about to explore the ideas that made him such a threat. His sharp critique of society, his diagnosis of how the state really works, and the pretty radical solution he proposed for all of humanity. For his entire life, Tolstoy was just wrestling with this one central problem: the absolute, staggering hypocrisy he saw at the core of so-called modern Christian society. He just could not square what society said it believed with what it actually did. And this quote just nails that contradiction perfectly. This example, which he actually borrowed from a British politician, shows that jarring conflict between the values we're taught and the violent actions we're told to carry out. A society teaches love, but then it trains its own citizens to kill. How does that work? This was the fundamental question that drove Tolstoy's entire philosophical journey. How can a society that claims to follow a guy who preached forgiveness and turning the other cheek, how can it base its entire existence on armies and police and prisons? Honestly, it's a question that still echoes in our own debates today about state power and justice. So, to answer that question, he started to really dissect the machine that kept this whole contradiction going, the state itself. And his conclusion was pretty shocking. He decided the state wasn't some benevolent protector. It was actually a system designed to keep violence going. He called this system the cycle of violence. And the key here is that it's not just random acts of force. No, it's an intentional, self-reinforcing loop. And it's designed for one purpose: to keep the state in power no matter what. And what's really fascinating is how he breaks this cycle down. First, the state intimidates and punishes anyone who dares to challenge it. Second, it uses the money it takes from people to corrupt its own officials and buy their loyalty. Third, and this is a big one, it uses schools, patriotism, even religion to create what he called a kind of hypnosis, basically a blind obedience. And finally, it uses those hypnotized people as soldiers to enforce the entire system with violence. It's a perfect, vicious circle. Okay, so the diagnosis is pretty grim. What's the cure? Well, Tolstoy's solution was just as radical, if not more so, than his diagnosis. And he found the answer in a teaching of Christianity that he believed the entire world had just decided to ignore. And this is the absolute crucial point. When Tolstoy talks about non-resistance, he doesn't mean just passively taking whatever harm comes your way. It is the exact opposite. It's an active, principled, and revolutionary refusal to take part in any kind of state-sanctioned violence. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, it means refusing to serve in the army. It means rejecting those oaths of allegiance that put the state above your own conscience. And it means refusing to pay taxes that you know are going to be used to fund the machinery of violence. I mean, these are acts of conscientious objection that have fueled nonviolent movements for generations, from his time all the way to our own. It's a proposal for a completely new way of life. So ultimately, Tolstoy saw humanity at a crossroads, facing two paths that could never, ever be reconciled. On one side, you have the state's path: justice through force, punishment for wrongs, and loyalty to the nation. And on the other, you have the Christian path: justice through love, forgiveness for your enemies, and loyalty to all of humanity. Okay, so the principles are clear. But I know what you're thinking. How can a few people refusing to cooperate possibly change a massive, powerful state? Well, Tolstoy argued that real change doesn't come from bombs or violent revolutions. It starts with the moral courage of just one person. And to explain this, he uses this fantastic analogy: the beehive. Just imagine a huge swarm of bees all clustered together on a branch. For that whole swarm to move to a new home, what has to happen? Well, one single bee has to be the first one to spread its wings and fly away. That one act, as small as it seems, is the necessary trigger for the entire group to follow. This is exactly why the state is more afraid of a quiet act of conscience than it is of a violent uprising. First, you can kill a person, but you can't kill their belief with violence. Second, these acts of refusal directly pull apart the very pillars of state power, like the army and loyalty oaths. But most importantly, it breaks the spell. It shows everyone else that life is possible without the state, and that shatters the hypnosis it needs to survive. Tolstoy takes this one step further with his final and really powerful analogy. He compares our relationship with a violent state to being trapped in a collective nightmare. Think about it. In a nightmare, everything feels completely real, right? The state's hypnosis works the same way. It gives a good person a mask, the mask of a soldier, a prison guard, a judge. And under that mask, they feel like they have to do things they would never do as an individual, like caging or even killing another human being. So, how do you escape? Well, the only way out of a nightmare is to wake up. It takes a conscious moral effort to realize that you are dreaming, to question the very reality of the system that feels so total and inescapable. More than a century after Tolstoy wrote these forbidden works, his question feels more relevant than ever. He puts it right in front of each and every one of us. In that moment of truth, when the demands of the state collide directly with the voice of your own conscience, which one will you obey?